There we go.
Peter,
So-
have you been befriended by Facebook again?
I don't know. I tried. Some people have tried to post links to some of my sites, and Facebook blocked them. So I haven't checked today. But
Juno Supremo.
yeah, so I'll check tomorrow.
Crazy world, eh?
You're not wrong. So I did get a few volunteers who wanted to talk tonight, and the first person was Bob Livingston. So the floor is over to you, Bob. What's your story? Is it a tall one? Do we believe it?
First things first, is there anybody having trouble with my sound, volume, or anything like that?
No, it's good tonight.
It's all good.
Good Bob.
Good. This is not so much an aviation story as a trip, shall we say, a tour around with a lot of different aeroplanes and things happening. As you all would well know, I was called up and did a couple of years in the Army, including a trip to Vietnam. And the first one, because I was a replacement, my unit did not go over holus bolus like the infantry people basically did until somebody got shot, and then they had to replace them. So we did a full 12-month tour, whereas some of the guys who came in late, like infantry guys who might have come in halfway through the battalion's tour, they only did that much and then they came home with that. So I didn't go across on an aircraft carrier or anything like that, but Qantas took me over in a 707. Unfortunately, I didn't take any notes of what the specific registration was, but we had to go via Darwin. So we flew Sydney to Darwin and did a refuel there. And I can remember walking out, and this was in December. So we were smack in the middle of the wet season in Darwin. And I walked to the exit door of the aircraft and felt the heat and the humidity that came from Darwin and thought, Christ, what the hell is Vietnam going to be like if this is what it's like in Darwin? Anyway, they buttoned us up again and they took us to Singapore, where we were wearing our what was called polys, our polyesters, our dress uniforms with lanyards and the whole works. But before we got out of the aircraft in Singapore, we had to put on a civilian shirt because the Singaporeans were not allowing transit of military personnel to Vietnam. So this was this little game that they played and we played. So all these guys wearing the same boots and the same coloured pants got off with different coloured shirts. And we spent a little bit of time while the aircraft was serviced and refueled and that, and then we went back on the aircraft and flew into, that was an overnight flight or late. It was in the dark. I remember that because we arrived over the Saigon Delta, the delta of the river, fairly early in the morning, and there was haze everywhere and you couldn't see anything a great deal of anything. And I did take a photograph. It's pretty fuzzy. And I remember looking down and thinking, shit, you know, there's a real shooting war going on down there and you're going to be in the middle of it shortly. So it was an unusual sensation. We landed at Tonsanut, taxied in, and went past the most amazing collection of American warplanes you could possibly think of, including their version of the Canberra, which they were using on night interdiction stuff, which I took photographs of, and I do have them still. I've had to pull the innards out of it to get any sort of picture because I somehow or other had mucked up the settings, bumped the settings on the camera, and it was all very heavily underexposed. But it's still visible, and I've even been able to pull a serial off them. So we went off to war, did our thing, and towards the end of the time, because while we were there, we had the opportunity to do some flying. I was absolutely busting my proverbials to get myself in a Canberra. I wanted to ride in a Canberra on a mission. I never achieved it, obviously. You know, Lance Corporals in the army don't get much of a, haven't got much pull when they expect to be able to put on a Canberra. I did get myself to Phan Rang, however, and I did spend a week in Phan Rang. And the Air Force guys looked after me very well by throwing me in the Phan Rang swimming pool, fully dressed. And that was the end of that watch on the way when I was coming home. But we got the opportunity we had where we were working, we had a helipad right behind us. And the helipad was very, very busy. And I took quite a few photographs of the various helicopters that used to come in and out of there. So there was Navy types, mostly Iroquois of various types, and some Loaches, the little Hughes 269, which was used over there quite extensively as well. But the good thing about that was that we were able to go down there and stick out our thumbs on a day off. And we would do that. So I got to travel all over there, within a certain range of an Iroquois range, of various parts of Vietnam. And there's very distinct memories of just acres and acres and acres of nothing but bomb craters. Everything had just had the shit bombed out of it completely. And at one location when we were there, we were near enough to an arc light operation with the B-52, and the concussion from the B-52 raid was sufficient to lift us right up and drop us back down again. Wow. We actually came, the ground rose and fell with the concussion of that. So what it was like being right in it, I couldn't possibly imagine. Impossible. But towards the end of my time, there was a message came around and said that anybody whose tour finished within a certain period of time was able to apply to go on a trip to the UK. And this was organised by the Brits in Malaya. They ran a Christmas flight back to the UK for their troops, and they hadn't been able to fill the aircraft. Wow. So they were expecting POMs who were in the Australian Army might take the opportunity to go across. So it was my best mate over there read it, he looked at it and he said to me, I don't know about you, but I'm going. And I said, well, if you're going, I'm going. So we applied and won a seat each. And so the very last night we were there, I was down in Vung Tau. The currency that we used over there was military payment script, MPC, in US dollars, which you couldn't use outside the country, so it was useless anywhere else. You could, however, get the real thing by doing some, shall we say, not exactly legal, in fact, completely illegal black marketing.
Black market.
And we would use that money. We would go downtown, sell that, turn it into local currency. Never had to touch a pay the whole time I was in Vietnam. So we were down in Vung Tau having a obviously fairly boozy night, because the next day we were leaving the place and we couldn't have been happier about that. So we spent all our money, and what we didn't spend, we gave away, handed it all out to everybody else. And I don't know about anybody else, but I got christened with a whole heap of beer. And when I woke up in the morning, it was like my greens had been starched. I must have stunk. Absolutely stunk. Anyway, we were loaded onto a C-130. Now, my memory says it was an A, but it was probably an E. To take us from Vung Tau across to Butterworth. And so we went belting down the runway and this thing got airborne and we hit a block of firs and lost an engine. So around we came, back in, landed on 3, got kicked out of the aeroplane. When they looked at it, not fixable, needed a new engine. Nearest engine was Melbourne. So we were stuck in Vung Tau, written off the books. We were no longer a part of the Australian Army Vietnam anymore. There was no accommodation available. We had no money. And luckily we borrowed some money off some of the people we'd given money to the night before and proceeded to get on the booze again, of course. Slept on the concrete floor of a hut, an empty hut that night. The RAF did a great job. They brought an engine up overnight, changed the engine, and by the next day, we were back in the same aeroplane and heading off to Singapore. Sorry, to Butterworth.
It's a good turnaround.
Which was good. Butterworth, for anybody who has ever been there, spent some time there. Daryl, did you ever get to Butterworth? No, okay.
No.
Absolutely lovely place. Everything's manicured because everybody's got somebody to do all those jobs.
Yeah,
Certainly the Air Force don't do those jobs. They pay people to do them. And 3 Squadron was there, and 76, I think, was the other Mirage Squadron. So we had a few days in Butterworth, wandering the flight line, taking photographs. Nobody seemed to worry too much about us. We also went from Butterworth across to mainland, to Penang a couple of times because that's where the dives were. And in those days, the bridge didn't exist. It was all by ferry. We caught a very, very late night ferry on the back into Butterworth for the next day. The only thing is we both fell asleep on the ferry and we went backwards and forwards a couple of times, but luckily woke up when it was still on its last run back into Butterworth. Otherwise, we'd been stuck in Penang for the rest of the night. Again, no money and no accommodation. So back to Butterworth. We then had to make our own arrangements to get onto this flight, which was out of Singapore. So we had booked on, which it was not, it was just Malaysian Airlines back in those days. But no, sorry, take it back. It's the other way around, wasn't it? It was MSA, Malaysian Singapore Airlines, and a little stubby 737, as I remember, we went on. And we flew down to Singapore and stayed in some army barracks in Singapore. We were quite well looked after in that respect. And then we went out to the main civilian airport to catch our flight to the UK. And our aircraft turned out to be a trooping, what do you call it, a Bristol Britannia. So the Britannia flew out. We went via Pakistan, into Pakistan, and then into Stansted. So we had a few weeks traveling, mostly Europe. Came back, got the same aircraft back, and halfway across the Med, we lost an engine and diverted into Athens. And what I failed to mention there was on the way across, it started to rain inside the aeroplane. and a purser came down with a little collapsible aluminium ladder and put it in the middle of the aisle with a screwdriver about 3 foot long, climbed up the ladder, took some roofing things out and disappeared for a bit, screwed a few things up and it stopped raining and continued on. So, the poor old aeroplanes were getting a little bit old at this stage. So there we were, stuck in the terminal at Athens. We had no visas, we had no nothing. We were bored stiff, army guys, straight out of Vietnam, most of us, being looked after by one, was he a captain? I'm not sure whether he was a captain. Captain, he might have been a full Louis, I suppose. Can't remember exactly now. He was our supposed looker after. He got so drunk on ouzo that he passed out, and he was asleep passed out on the chairs and things there. We were at the bar, of course. What else could you do? And every time we handed over money, we got our change back into the junk the guy couldn't use any other way. And when we tried to pay for a drink with the junk, he wouldn't accept it. So again, another engine had to be flown out and replaced on this aircraft. We then flew, we picked this, the officer who was in charge of us up and carried him onto the aircraft, where he stayed unconscious until we got back into Singapore. Very nicely looked after, not. And then the Air Force picked us up again, the RAF, picked us up from there in another Herc and flew us to Darwin. And after a refuel in Darwin, we went down to Richmond. And I got out of the aircraft there, stayed in the barracks at North Head in Sydney. My mate, who was West Australian, he disappeared on the train to Perth. And I went to the airport and got myself on I think it was TAA DC-9 to come back to Brisbane. The last time I had written to my parents was in Cologne in Germany, where we were there for New Year's Eve, which was a lot of fun. I had schoolboy German and got by with a bit of German, talking to a guy who was a German, could speak a bit of French and a bit of English. And it's amazing how we were able to communicate completely effectively, no problems at all, probably because we were fairly drunk at the time. And I remember trying to pick up one very luscious looking German girl, and they laughed at my accent when I approached them in German. Anyway, we flew into Brisbane. So I thought my parents would have known something because I'd given them some information. As it so happened, that postcard I'd sent from Cologne arrived about 3 weeks after I did. And I rolled up at the front gate of 20 Dewar Terrace, Sherwood, after a bit over 2 years since they'd seen me, in a yellow cab, and surprised the hell out of them. And that was a great collection of aeroplanes across a 2-year period, which I thought might be interesting.
Very good.
Bob, can I ask you a couple of questions?
Yeah.
Number one, what was your duration on that Vietnam stint? And number two, what was your role? What put you sort of ahead of the other unit members, and therefore in the seat to go to Vietnam at that point?
Well, in national service, of course, you didn't have a choice about where you went. It's like everything else. You get 3 choices, and they send you to whichever bloody one they want you to go to. I put down for intelligence, which wouldn't have worked anyway because I didn't know enough about the army or the war to have been any use to them. So that was a waste of time putting that in. I put down for SIGs, and I can't remember what the third one was, but anyway, I got put in SIGs, which is the core of signals. So I was then, this was after basic training. And I remember sitting in this huge auditorium full of people who'd just been through this particular intake, and they called us out alphabetically by name and told you what corps you're in. And every name they called, they said, infantry, infantry, infantry. And of course, me being an L, I'm smack in the middle. And it was a long time getting down to me, and I was starting to shit blue lights because I really wasn't looking forward to being an infantryman carrying a freaking great big heavy pack and an SLR through the jungle. Thank you very much. I was pretty happy with signals. Went to Melbourne, was trained as a signaller, and as it was, I wound up as a what they called an OKR, an ops keyboard and radio. And I was sent again, you were given 3 choices of where you wanted to go. My mates all put down Vietnam, 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 and they went to Canberra. And I put down anywhere but Vietnam and went to Vietnam straight away because they really needed people with my skills. I actually topped the OKR course. I've got a little medal to show for what a wonderful chap I was. And so I wound up in the main signal centre in Saigon, which was in a shed down behind the main headquarters of Australian ATF in Vietnam, and the Americans had big headquarters there as well. So we got attacked every now and again, and we were shelled quite often. So my job basically was to receive all messages that emanated from Australia, which was all sent on HF radio through all the sunspot activity, which ruined the crap out of them. Sort them out, fix them up, get them readable. It all came out as punch tape on teleprinter, and we would then break that signal message down to all the different places it was addressed to, producing a whole heap of new tapes, and send them off to all the different places they had to go to. And we worked 17-hour night shifts because of curfew. We weren't allowed on the streets in Saigon after, I've forgotten, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, might have been 6 o'clock.
Excuse me, Bob, I think we might ask you to pause there, otherwise we won't get a chance for anyone else to have a chat.
How many people have we got, Peter?
I've got Warwick's one more, and I was going to ask one other person to give a talk. He doesn't know.
So that was my basic job over there. And within 3 months of arriving, I was OIC of that unit, of that job.
And duration in
as a lance
Vietnam?
corporal.
And duration in Vietnam?
Well, it was supposed to be 1 year, but my replacement was late and I overshot by a week or 2.
Thanks, Bob. Before we move on, I'll just share with you the minutes, which I finished for tonight's meeting just after Bob started. So there's the minutes. I'll issue them out either later tonight or tomorrow. I had them half done before we started. Right, I'll hand over to Warwick, eh? Thanks, Bob.
Okay, I'll only take a few minutes, a little, I hope to be slightly humorous story. Back in my days, I was flying DC-9s, first officer. Townsville is one of the places we went to very often. For those who don't know Townsville, and I know Bob does, Peter does very well, main runway roughly north-south. The Air Force is at the southern and eastern end of it. And the civilian tarmac is about halfway down the right-hand, to the right of the main runway. About 2/3 of the way down the runway, there's a turn-off taxiway. And commonly, when we landed on that runway, we'd land and turn off at that spot 3/4 of the way down. 2/3 or 3/4, about that anyway. One night coming there, and the captain was landing, and for one reason or another, we were still going a bit faster. We approached that taxiway, and rather than brake heavily, quite reasonably, decided to let it roll through to the far end, and we turned off down there. So taxiing back in the dark on the parallel taxiway to the east of the runway, and we know we're going to go up there and we're going to turn right and go to the terminal. So we're taxiing up a fair way, and we come to a taxiway to our right. It turned in there, and it was a very short taxiway, and then it turned left. Okay, we'll do that. We taxied into the left, and we didn't realise that there was the bird bath. The bird bath was put in there to wash Neptunes after a lot of low altitude maritime flying, and they'd come back salty. So they had this place you taxi in, and it would spray water all over the airplane. Mm. And we didn't know, but that goes off automatically. So we taxied into that, And the DC-9 got a wash.
Got a wash.
Up the cockpit, we didn't even realise what was happening because it sort of triggered off just after we'd gone through them. We were just going through it. And the whole DC-9 got a big water wash. And we changed through that and we turned right, taxi with a wet DC-9, parked the passenger stalls. Now, that's the main bit of a chuckle there. But there's a postscript to it. A couple of years ago, I was down at Evans Head, the annual flying they have down there. And over dinner, chatting to a couple of guys who turned out to be air traffic controllers, and we're chatting on, and turned out one of them had been in Townsville. And I told him that little tale, my little tale about Townsville. He said, I was on duty that night. He saw what had happened. And we were tossing up with the control tower whether we should send TAA a bill for all the distilled water was wasted. Okay, that's my little short chat. Now, somebody else got something funny to say?
Daryl, can I was going to put it on Peter Crouch to give us a little chat. Peter, today I sent out an email about the F-111 incident at Amberley where it lost a wheel. I know you were there on that day. Would you like to give us a little chat about that? You're muted at the moment. You need to unmute yourself, Pete. See if I can do it for you.
I'm not seeing his picture now.
Yeah, he's still there. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Oh, good. Thanks for the invitation. Totally unexpected. But yes, I was there on the day, and I was, apart from one bloke in the tower, the only person that saw the wheel galloping across the paddock. That's a true story. And I was actually driving a light truck at the moment at that time, and it was heading for a donga that was a low-set donga full of people. And I thought, hell, this is going to be fun. So I tried to put the truck in the way, missed out by about 5 feet. It was travelling very fast. It had done a complete U-turn to the takeoff direction. And I'd say that occurred because of the bias and the weight of the brake affair that was attached to the wheel. Exciting times. The whole base stopped for 4 hours and 6 minutes. I started a stopwatch when we had the incident, and it was 4 hours and 6 minutes before he attempted the actual final landing in the end. But I was granted the option of being the only person that saw the wheel bolting across the paddock. Tried hard to get it, missed it. So there you go.
Wasn't there something to do with the commanding officer's vehicle that it?
Engineer, wasn't it? The senior engineer?
It was a wing commander. It was a white Falcon wagon from memory, and it was parked in a line of two or three cars, broadside to the direction of the travel of the wheel, and it just caught the very front section of the front mudguard. Just had it not, it would have gone into this donga. Hit it, bounced about 10 feet in the air, and then came whack back down on the ground. It was still moving quite rapidly, I can tell you. Yeah, that was it. Yeah, knocked off his car a bit.
Thanks, Pete. Sorry to put you in the gun there.
Thanks for the notice. Yeah.
That's all right. No problem. Anytime.
Peter, can I just follow that up, please? A cousin of mine was an RAAF padre at, I presume, at Amberley at that time. And the story that he gave me some years ago was that the wheel, this wheel that rumbled off somewhere, took out the CO's car. From what you're telling me, it was only the front mudguard.
Yeah, Peter, you're muted again. Sorry, mate.
Does that mean Peter didn't hear me?
No,
He heard
said
you,
he
but
couldn't.
you can't hear him. Yeah, it wasn't the CO's car.
Okay, thank you.
No, it wasn't the CO's car. It was I'm not sure whether he was a Boeing employee or still in the Air Force, but somewhere between in the area of a wing commander. And yeah, no, that was it. It was a white Falcon wagon. And as I said, it moved about 5 or 10 feet sideways. The weight of the wheel in motion still had a lot of energy behind it. And I was really concerned that it was going to whack into this donga, this lazette donga. But yeah, that's the story. I know a bit about that. They gave me an award for it, a picture.
Thanks again, Pete. So Daryl, over to you, mate.
Yeah, okay. I've got a bit of history that I didn't know about before I heard it. I don't know if anybody else has heard about it. It's sort of aviation, but if you can endure my voice while I read this, it's an interview with my mother. She was the mayor of the city of Tea Tree Gully for a number of years, and they did an oral history on her with her in August 2016. I got to hear about this because my mum suffered a fall shortly afterwards and knocked her head. She's still with us, but she can't remember these things. So all I can say is that thank God she did this, because her family, all of us, had never heard some of these stories. I'll just find my starting point. Starts with her at high school in the mid-50s. And I'm going to read her voice so I give it justice. She got 2 scholarships during her high school years. One was in third year high school, which is year 10 now. She says yes. And another one at the end of year 12 to go to university. She's living in Port Augusta. She did year 12 with her grandparents in Adelaide because year 12 wasn't offered in country schools. She was asked, was this unusual? She said, I guess it was. Yes. The scholarship at the end of year 10 was to get to year 12. And then she then attended university, but probably almost for only a year. She had chosen to study maths instead of something that led to a career, and found university maths quite different from high school maths and didn't see the year out. From there, she got a job at WRE, Weapons Research Establishment out of Penfield, or Salisbury. Elizabeth might be more familiar with you. So maths came in very handy out there. This would have been 1955, 54, 55, and WRE had taken over the old World War II munitions factory. So you're familiar with WRE?
Yes.
Yeah, you'll know that. They had a name, a local name for it. It was initially called Long Range Weapons Establishment, which the people there christened LRWE, or Lambs, Rams, Weathers and Ewes, because of the sheep that they had out there on station to keep the grass down. Later, when it changed to WRE, it just became Weathers, Rams and Ewes. She met my father out there, who was my to-be father, who was working in a laboratory across the corridor from her laboratory. Her job description was a computer. Now, you may have seen that movie in recent times called Hidden Figures.
Yep.
In the US, about the black women working for NASA. That's sort of begins its story in 1961. Well, in 1954, 55, my mother was a computer working for WRE. Her specific job there, all she ever told us was that she calibrated instruments in that lab. Anyway, she met my father and they married. And from there, so they married in 1956, early 56, and moved to Woomera. Rented a house that came with furniture, everything included, which was, she says, really handy for a newlywed. She loved Woomera. She didn't know how many people were there at the time, but they had a single men's quarters, sergeant's mess, officer's mess, and a camp at West Woomera where a lot of single men lived, and that was where they had an open air cinema. So she loved the open cinema, going to the movies under the stars. Not very aviation yet, but we'll get there. So it was one weekend, it must have been, news went right around the village that the Russians had put a satellite up and the Americans weren't first. So this is 1957. Did you know that they were going to be doing that before it happened? She answers, I don't think so, no. The Russians had beaten the Americans and it was up there. The location they had just outside our village where there was a building, they were building a laboratory, if you like, to be ready to get communications from the American satellite, wasn't finished. Every able-bodied man in the village that thought they could help went out there and they finished the building in record time and equipped it with everything. The next thing that happened was that I, my mother, and another lady called Judy Boyd, mum says, I had a baby who had just begun walking. That's me. So I'm, she says she thinks I'm 10 or 11 months old. And Judy had a little girl who was 18 months old. So we were both approached, probably by two separate people, but we were approached at the same time to share a job. They needed people with our experience and expertise to be at that communications lab when the satellites were going over, which for them was between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. The deal was that, for example, I would be working the first night, a car would come and pick me up at midnight and take me out to the communications shack. I would take down all the information I was getting from the satellite and pass that information to two young soldiers who were radio experts, and they were sending that information to NASA in the United States or wherever. And then the car would take me home in time to get Keith, and that's my father's breakfast, sending him off to work. And then I would take my baby, me, to Judy's. She would look after both children that day while I came back and went to sleep. And next night that they would rotate that deal. So without going on to the rest of it, yeah, I learned about that in about 2018 when my sister chose to share it with me after my mother had a fall. Never knew it.
Amazing.
I remember it quite well. In fact, there was a little ditty that used to go around when it went across. It was, see you soon, you little red moon.
Evidently, it was. I looked into it after just a general reading, but yeah, you could see it. Everybody was quite aware it was up there.
Bloody hell, yeah.
Yeah. So it was a. Anyway, my father was involved in rockets and missile testing. He was a technician, not a scientist or an engineer, but he had quite an interesting career, which culminated in when all the programs were cancelled. We were in England at that time, working on joint projects. So there are a little bit of history.
Thanks,
Our
Darryl.
guys in Australia were very much interested in what was going on.
Thank you very much.
I well remember the Sputnik set off a whole series of toys and gimmicks and things that went beep.
Yes,
So
I'm
I'm not sure. That's all she says about what she recorded. For all I know, she taped or put it on some recording device and passed it on. She wasn't a communications expert. She was an instruments and expert, mathematician, that sort of thing. So she might have been monitoring instruments or recording instruments rather than recording the beep.
I remember going out and seeing a first Sputnik going over.
Yep.
When I was a kid in Sydney.
Yep.
I don't think it had any I don't think it was sending any special information down. I think it was just an audible beep so that they could keep track of the thing and make sure it was still working, etc. But
No, that was to tell him.
I know my father took me outside and we watched it go across the sky.
Yeah.
We had a lawn in I was in Western Australia at that time, and our lawn had a nice slope on it. So you take your beer, lie down on the lawn and watch it go over.
Yep.
Yeah.
But talking in Woomera, which I've been to, I was watching a documentary on the ABC about birds in Australia. And this one comes back to me. We were flying up range in the Sycamore helicopter. There was a dead sheep and 5 of the largest wedge-tailed eagles I've ever seen eating the sheep. So being nice, polite people, we came into the hover and we rolled the whole 5 arse over tip till they were some distance away, then sat back and watched. First time, all 5 came back. So we went in another go, 3 came back. Went in another go, 2 came back. I went in for last go and 1 came back, and he was so bloody big, I gave up and gave him the sheep.
He's likely to bite you.
Any more stories?
I think we might wind up the night then. Thank you all for coming, in inverted commas, and we'll see you on Friday night.
Yep.
Okay.
For sure.
Oh, you won't see me, but I'll give my apologies. Sorry, but I'll watch the
Okay.
recording.
Okay.
Thanks, Warwick. Thanks, Peter.
I'll try and log in from a hotel in Adelaide.
Ah,
Thanks all.
Thanks,
you.
Thanks, folks.
Okay then,
Right.
thank you.